Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I have done this session a couple of times before. I have been talking about extending the Power Platform with custom connectors for a very long time. I changed it a little bit around because it's today, of course, Teams Nation. And what I actually added in this session is to show a little bit also about the API management layer that you can use to deploy your custom connectors also to Dataverse for Teams. And that's something, it's a really nice feature. And a lot of people don't know about it, but it can be really valuable for you. So that's why I added this to the presentation. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Daniel Laskowitz. I am the Power Platform lead at Society in the Netherlands. Society is part of Capgemini. So if you don't know Society, you probably know Capgemini. I'm a project coordinator group member for the Independent Publisher Connector Program. I'm going to talk a little bit later about that as well, because that's a really cool way to promote your own custom connector if you have built one. And we're going to talk about building your own custom connector in this session, of course. And who doesn't love it when they have built a custom connector and they can show it to the whole world and everybody can use what you have built. And that's something that you can do with the Independent Publisher Connector program. So without further ado, let's just move on into the session. So we all know the Power Platform. The connectors that I'm going to talk about today are for Power Apps and Power Automate. Of course, you can use Power Virtual Agents as well, together with Power Automate to trigger a flow that uses the custom connector. But for now, we are going to focus on the two in the middle, so Power Apps and Power Automate. The connectors have been around for a while. When I started with Microsoft Flow back in the days, there were only 12 connectors, I believe. That was in the preview, but now there's already more than 650 connectors. So there have been a lot of first-party connectors that are built by Microsoft. You can think of the Outlook connector, for instance, or you can think of SharePoint connector, Dataverse connector. All those connectors are first-party connectors. And then you also have these certified connectors, and that's really cool if you are a company that offers a certain service and you want to have your connector also on the platform. And that's possible through the Certified Connector Program. So if you have your own service, for instance, something like Spotify could create their own connector and then certify it with Microsoft, and then it will be available in the products. And the products are Power Apps, Power Automate, and actually Logic Apps will get the same connectors as well. Then we have the Independent Publisher connectors, and that's the latest boost that actually got into the platform, because a lot of people have been building Independent Publisher connectors lately, and you can recognize them by like an orange kind of icon with two people in there, and that's the Independent Publisher connector logo. And what it is that you can also create a custom connector for a service that you are not the owner of. And that's a really important thing, because when you create your custom connector and you want to certify it, you can only certify it when you're the boss of that service. So I'm not allowed to create a connector for Teams, for instance, because Teams is owned by Microsoft and I'm not the owner of that. So that's why I can certify it. But the Independent Publisher connector makes it possible for you to look at some kind of API that you want to enable in the Power Platform. You can create a custom connector for it, and then you can submit it to the Independent Publisher connector program. And then when Microsoft approves it, they will put it in the bucket of connectors that are available in the platform. Apart from that, you also have the possibility to create your own custom connector. So if you are working at a company that has their own APIs and you don't want to submit an independent publisher connector, for instance, to the whole world of that API, you can of course create your own custom connector for that. And then you can only deploy it within your own environment. So why do you want to use custom connectors? Well, custom connectors are really interesting if you have your own APIs and you want to also make it possible for people, for makers, to create Power Apps and flows based on that connector. Another reason that you can use that is for when a connector is not available in the product. So when it's not one of those 650 plus connectors, you can of course build your own custom connector and use that as well. And also another reason could be when a connector is not advanced enough. So I've seen tons of people create custom connectors for instance, Microsoft Teams, because some of the actions that you want for Microsoft Teams are maybe not available inside of the connector. I know Microsoft Teams connector is pretty advanced, but there have been certain scenarios that haven't been included in that connector. So that's why then a custom connector could be really interesting. The last couple of years, for instance, the create a team action wasn't available. And that's something that has been included now, but a lot of people created a custom connector for that as well, for instance. And how do you build a connector? Well, of course, you need to know about the API that you want to build a connector for, because if you don't know that API well enough, you're going to get into trouble when you are building a connector. You can start from one of the products. So you can go to make.powerapps.com, you can go to powerautomate.com, or you can go to Logic Apps and start the wizard there. Well, when you start the wizard, you need to set up the authentication. After that, you need to define the operations. So which actions do you want to have in your connector? Which triggers do you want to have in your connector? And then, of course, at the end, you want to save and test your connector because everybody likes a good working connector, so make sure to save and test. And then, of course, if you find something, you can change the operations again in your connector. So yeah, let's just start building one. And I have a really nice website, chucknorris.io. I already built this connector. It's actually a connector that gets all kinds of Chuck Norris facts, and you can create a request and you get a Chuck Norris joke back. So let me share my screen. There we go. I hope you all can see it. If somebody can give it a thumbs up. Yes, great. Okay, so we are here in the Power Automate website. When you want to create a connector, you need to go to Data and then to Custom Connector. If you are there, you're able to create a new custom connector. You can create from blank, you can create from an Azure service, you can import an OpenAPI file from your PC, for instance, but also from a URL. You can import a Postman collection and you can import from GitHub. In this case, we are going to create from blank. But before I do that, I want to switch to the website chucknorris.io to show you what's actually available in this API, because we need to know our API before we can do something about it. So when you look at the website, well, you can retrieve a random Chuck joke in JSON format, and it shows that you need to do a get to this address, and then you get a response with an icon URL, ID, URL, and a value. So you already have a sample here, which can be really, really helpful. But if we scroll down a little bit, you can see that you can also retrieve a random Chuck Norris joke from a given category. And that makes it a little bit more interesting, because then you can already filter down on a category. You, of course, need to know which categories there are. So that's why you have to retrieve a list of available categories. And you can also do a get for that. There are no samples of those the second and the third example, but we can test that out and try it there. For now, I'm gonna select this part and I'm gonna copy it because we are gonna need it here. So we are gonna use the retrieve a random Chuck Norris joke from a given category. I'm gonna select new connector, create from blank. I'm gonna call this Chuck Norris jokes and select continue. Well, here you have some general information. You can, for instance, upload a connector icon. You can use a icon background color. You can add a description. You can even say that it needs to connect via on-premise data gateway, but that's not the case here. And then we get to the scheme, and the scheme we need to add the URL in here. So I'm gonna add that URL. And I'm going to move to the next step in the wizard. Well, for us, it's going to be really easy because this is an open API, so you don't have to add any authentication. Normally, you can do basic authentication. You can add an API key. You can use OAuth 2, but for now, we're going to use no authentication because it's not needed for this. Then we go to the definition section. And in here, we have the possibility to add actions, to add triggers, to add policies as well. For now, we are going to use the new action. And now I can add some details here. So I believe we had already a description here. So let me just copy and paste that because I'm really lazy. Oh, it didn't copy. Let's do it again. There we go. Get random Chuck Norris joke. So yeah, these are the summary and the description. If you select the learn more link, you can actually go to another page. And on that page, it also shows you where the summary appears. So you actually have an idea of where those texts will show up in the product. So that's really nice to see as well. The same goes, of course, for the description. So the description is something that you see in the text boxes, for instance, or maybe at a little eye at the side. So those kinds of things are in there as well. The operation ID, it's something that needs to be unique. So in this case, I'm gonna get random Chuck joke. Oh, does not start with an uppercase letter. Hold on. This will. Yeah, works. Okay. The visibility is something that you can change. You can also see what that actually does. For some actions, you don't want to show them. An example of that is, for instance, when you use the SharePoint or the Teams connector, they have some magical drop-downs in there, for instance, for the team name that you can select. Sometimes you don't want to have the action behind that because it dynamically loads all the teams. You might not want to show that action. So you don't want to see the get teams action, but you want to have it as a selection box in one of your actions. That's when you can put it, for instance, on internal or something else. And that way it will not show up. For the request, we're going to import from sample. I'm going to go back to the URL because I just copied another text. So let's copy this one again and add it here. Select get. And for now, we are actually ready. So we chose the get verb. So we're going to get from this URL. And when I select import, it automatically recognizes the query as well. So it shows category here. And I can, yeah, if I want, I can fill in all the different details here. For now, for timing reasons, we're not going to do that. But you can see that it's really easy to add this. For the response, we can also import from sample. And in this case, we're gonna use the example response from the Chuck Norris API. and import that, and it will also show all the different values. If you don't do this, you are not going to see all the different parts at the side in the dynamic content field. So if you want to see the outputs of a request, you always need to enter a response, because that helps you a lot in there. Okay, so for here, it's currently done. Now we are going to move to the next request, and that's getting the categories. In this case, we are going to add a new action and call it get categories. Okay, import from sample again. I'm going to add a get here. I see a question. We can add multiple responses. So we can add, yeah, currently it's default, but you can add another one and call it 200, 300, whatever you want. So for now, I'm not going to do all of that, but it is possible. So that's certainly the case. For the response, I'm not going to do anything in here, and I am done with this part. We have another step called code preview. I'm not going to use that here, but you can add code to manipulate your data before the request, for instance, but also when you have gotten the response from the connector. So there's lots of stuff possible. When I go to test, it gives me the warning that I need to create it. So when I create the connector now, it will save the connector, and the testing window will be available here. And then I can see if I got my connector right here. So here we are. For the test operation, you always need to have a connection. Also, when you are connecting to an API that doesn't have authentication. So when you do that, it will not ask you for any details, but it will just create a connection for you. And now I can do the test operation, and I can see all the different categories that are available in here. So for instance, I can select food, and then I can use that in the next call, and that's to get a random chug joke. And I can test the operation, and then I can see that there's actually more available here. You can see categories in here, but also created ad, etc. And that's something that sometimes happens with APIs because they haven't updated the docs. So you can see that we have a lot more in here than the response example that I showed here. Sometimes you can just copy this part and then put that in the definition so that you can also do something with that as well. But you can see the value here when Chuck Norris was denied an Egg McMuffin at McDonald's because it was 10:35. He roundhouse kicked the store so hard it became a Wendy's. So that's the joke. It also has a URI. So when you want to do that as well, you can hold on, open it up. You can also see it in a nice website as well. So if you want to send it to somebody, you can do that as well. Top quality right there, yeah, for sure. So yeah, this is actually really easy to create this connector by hand like this. Of course, it's not a perfect connector now because you always have to describe everything. You want to have a description per output and per input as well. You might want to connect also the two items together because for now it shows food here. So I need to manually type food in here. But if I want to connect this to the get categories part, I can also show a dynamic dropdown that will automatically get all the categories from the get categories step. And then I can just select one of those categories. So I don't have to first run the get categories to see what categories there are. I can just use that in a dropdown, just like you know from the Teams connector where you can select a team and where you can select a channel, etc. So that's kind of the basic part of how to to create a connector. I want to emphasize this part, by the way. So really take a look at all those extra parts that you have here. So the summary, etc., because that really helps the end user of your connector to understand what happens with that connector. So you really want to to use those properties, because I didn't do that in this example. I only did a couple of them. But for your end users, it's really good to have the complete thing in there. So let me move back to my slides now. And if somebody can give me a thumbs up if they see it. Oh, good, thank you. So there we are. So I already told a little bit about that you can combine certain operations, and that's something that you can do. You can do that inside of the wizard. Otherwise, I would have done that. But you really need to download the connector, manually change it around in Visual Studio Code, for instance, and then you can combine certain steps in there. And if you do that, then you can update it again. And when you have done that, then it will show the drop-down box of the categories. Sorry. And how you can do that? You can use the Power Platform Connector CLI. It's a CLI that Microsoft has provided. And it helps you a lot with the ALM story of the custom connectors. You can easily use a couple of commands. For instance, PA-con login, that's to connect to your environment. You can use PA-con download to download all the contents that you want from your connector. And you can easily do that and then open that folder, for instance, to edit your connector in Visual Studio Code. There's also PA-con create, so that you can create your connector from a local directory. You just have to pass in some parameters in there, and it will automatically create your connector and also enable it already. So that way you can just easily add app ID, app secret, and something like that if you have some authentication in there, and it will easily create that connector. One little thing about the PA-con update. The PA-con update is pretty tough to use, because there is some kind of sync between the custom connector that gets deployed to the Dataverse environment and the API management layer that they have behind that. So sometimes it happens that when you update your connector, that it doesn't actually update yet in the API management layer. If you want to debug your connector, that can be really frustrating, because when you are doing that, you have to wait until it's actually synced, and that can take up hours or maybe even a day. And you don't want to have that. So what I always do there, I just delete the connector and recreate it, or I create a connector multiple times with multiple names, because if you change the name enough, it doesn't recognize it as the same connector. And then you will actually be able to create it really easily. So that's one heads up I wanted to give you. Now, about the Teams part. Power Platform and Teams is really a happy marriage right now. I think Charles Lamana announced it a while back that all the Power Platform apps will be available in Teams. So with Dataverse for Teams, we have a lot of integration now with Teams. And apart from that, is really cool that all those apps are in there. There has been also an announcement, and it was a really small blog post. And a lot of people probably missed it, because it's a really cool scenario. The Azure API Management connector on the Power Platform came available. And that means that you can actually use Azure API Management, which is a paid service in Azure. And you can deploy all the APIs that you have in that Azure API Management connector in the Azure API management instance, and you can deploy those to certain Power Platform environments. And within Dataverse for Teams, you can also deploy those. So you don't have to have an additional license, not a Power Platform premium license, so no Power Apps or Power Automate premium license. But the cool part is also that with Azure API management, you can create APIs based on logic apps, but also on functions, etc. And that's really cool because that way you can easily create an Azure function, for instance, and deploy that as a connector into your Dataverse for Teams environments. And for me, that was really, really mind-blowing because, it gives a lot of people the ability to use those APIs. So all the citizen developers can use those API management connectors and just do it without having extra licenses. Of course, you have to pay for the Azure API management and still for the API that you are publishing, because it will probably be a logic app or an Azure function. But it's really nice to see that you have that available as well. So I want to take you for a short tour, because I'm almost out of time, through Azure API management to show you as well how that actually how that will work. So let me share my screen again, and let me, oh, hold on. Does everybody see it now? Yeah, okay, good. So I'm currently in Azure. I have a API management service running. I can select APIs here. I already created an API because of timing reasons, but you can actually easily create APIs from an Azure resource. So what you can do, for instance, is create a logic app, select it from this list, and then it will get added as a API to this list. And when you are done with adding the API, you can create a Power connector, Power Platform connector, and you can actually choose the API that you want to publish there. You can select the environment you want to use, and you can use the API display name to show the connector display name in Dataverse for Teams. And what happens then is it will show up in the environment. So I'm just going to skip all the deploying part, but you have to trust me, it works. So I have a Cloudflow here, and I'm going to edit that one to show you that there actually is a simple step, the get teams step. I can click on the plus here and see that Teams Nation is actually the connector in here. And that's the same connector that I deployed with this one. And what it actually does, it gets all the teams that I have in my environment. Oh, my Teams is a little bit buggy, but it shows the all the teams that are in my environment. It parses them and it adds them to a variable, and it will post an adaptive card if all goes right with the scenario in here. So let me test this one, and then when you run it, it should work. It has run successfully, and I got a flow card where I have a couple of display names with all the teams that are in my environment. So that's how you can easily use those as well. And this is just a simple scenario, but I wanted to show you that this is possible. And if you can think about other scenarios, for instance, we do a lot of work with creating teams, for instance, provisioning teams, and we also have a lot of customers that want to work together with ServiceNow, for instance, for the ticketing system, and that way you can combine those kinds of things as well. So that's kind of my my demo. I have 1 or 2 wrap-up slides, sorry, Chirag, and then we'll be done.
Take your time, you're fine.
Okay, let's go. There we go. Okay, we're good. Yeah, I have some resources, so I'll share the slides after this session as well, so you can easily click those all those resources as well. But there are some things here. For instance, the Power Platform connectors GitHub repository is really good to look at because there you can see all the different certified connectors. You can see some samples of how you could use all those different extra properties that I told you about. Also, the independent publisher connectors are in there, so you can see those as well. The extend and open API definition link, that's really important because that helps you with all those properties. So you know where it all shows up in the product. Custom code is also an interesting one to take a look at. Yeah, you can also create it from a Postman collection. So if you prefer working in Postman and then import that in your custom connector, you can do that as well. There's some coding standards to help you as well with certain best practices, etc. And also policy support. That's something that we haven't touched today, but that's also something really cool which can help you make a better custom connector. So that's some resources really fast, but I'll share the slides later on as well through my LinkedIn and Twitter, etc. So yeah,